In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Welcome back to my channel, Nadir Hussain Air. Today we are going to discuss that how to optimize rendering in React Native apps. Optimizing rendering means optimizing the performance of the apps, right? So let's first go through the outline, then we are going to check practically from code perspective that what these steps mean, right? So the logical first step is that we should have a way to observe the render time of the components, render count, that how many times a component has been rendered, and the reason that why, if component rendered multiple times, then what was the reason behind that, right? After that we need to take steps. What are those steps? The first thing is set state. We need to be careful about its use, that we do not necessarily unnecessarily set this set state, because set state causes the whole component to re-render, right? Then we have to remove console logs from our code, especially from our production build, or when we are basically profiling our app into the debug build. In that case, remove console logs. As set state renders the whole component, this basically logically tells us that we should basically break our UI into multiple child components, and those should be pure components, so that then we are going to ensure that only those child components rendered whose state has changed, and other components should not re-render, child components should not re-render. We are going to ensure that, right? So what are the pure components? Pure components are those components which are basically totally dependent on the input props. Their output is dependent on the input props. They do not have their own kind of state or some logic building inside them, right? They just use the input coming props and display them as a output. We have to use react.memo to memoize these pure components. Why we have to use this react.memo higher order component? Because this ensures that component renders, the child component renders, so this will be used on the child components, right? This ensures that child components are rendered only when their props have changed. If their props have not changed, then they should not render. And how does it know that props have changed or not? They compare it by reference, right? Referential equality, right? They do not compare by values. So keep in mind, this is very important point related with the next point. So in the child component, if you are passing some callback function, right, that will return to the parent component, then you have to use callback hook to memorize those callback functions. Why? If you are not going to use callback, then those functions are going to be created every time component renders, right? And the child component will think that its props have changed. In fact, the reference of that call function has changed, values have not changed, because react.memo compares props difference by reference, because it is easy, right? Instead of comparing values. So that's why we have to ensure that reference of our callback function remains same. They are not recreated every time component renders. Otherwise this will get useless, this react.memo. Okay. The other important point is that we have to avoid inline callback functions, right? Because this is again related to the same, that inline callback functions are created every time component renders. In case of Flatlist, one thing is particular thing is that we have to use key extractor into Flatlist, or keys inside the row atoms, right? One of them. If you are used key extractor, then do not use keys inside row atoms or render atoms of this Flatlist. And other parameters, that window size with which I experimented, because when I was scrolling the list quickly, it was getting blank. Then I set this window size. Window size is related with viewport. What is viewport? Viewport is basically that area which contains visible atoms of list, that is viewport, right? And window size means that number of viewports. So if window size is let's suppose 10, it means 10 viewports equivalent area should be created. Okay, now let's go through the I basically have violated these principles, right? And rendered the component. So let me, here is the list, right? So let's profile it and then scroll. I tested it onto the real device, right? And scrolling was jerky, a bit jerky, and I was getting empty screens as well. You may not see empty, the here you can see, right? So this was the issue, and the rendering was also slow, a bit jerky. So I took these steps that I mentioned to resolve these issues. So let's start profiling. Okay, what does this mean? It should not have been control and profiler is working, then okay, let's stop profiling, and you see these are the commits or the changes. So we have to look for the yellow. Let's look inside the, this is virtualized list, and what is this? Yes, 3.4 millisecond this view is taking, which is basically inside cell renderer of the Flatlist. So this is our row or the render atom, right? So now let's look into the code that why it is taking more time and how to improve that by taking the steps that I read into the outline. So this is a Flatlist, right? The first thing, let's go to the render atom. So here we are using, so let's make it a separate pure component, right? We have to avoid this so that the child component render only when their props have changed. So I made a separate component for this, and the name of that is search hobbies row. What it requires? It requires atom on add is added, and atom. Okay, this is first thing. Now look into the search hobbies row. So here you see this is just a pure component, no state being maintained, and I have used this react-devtools to memoize this. So this will only render, this row will only render if this change. So one thing to noticeable is that this is a function, on add is a function, and because this will compare, react.memo will compare by reference these parameters, we have to ensure that this function does not get recreated unnecessarily. So if we go to the on add, let's use callback. So use callback is used to memorize those functions which are used as a callback function to the child components. Okay, this was first thing that we have resolved. And the second thing is here again we are using inline function, we have to avoid that, and we have to put it out. What you can check here. And similarly separator component, here this is being used as an inline function. This basically makes noticeable difference in the performance if you remove inline functions. So we have removed inline functions as well. The other thing was that we have to avoid console log statements as well. Perfect. Okay, and the other thing was, let's use callback on this function as well. on search hobby. Sorry, this is not a callback function, rather. Okay, oh, I think that is enough. The other thing was the window size. So I experimented with the window size, and when I set it 50, my blank screen list issue got resolved. Now let's check. Here you see now scrolling has also improved, and there is no empty list which were we seeing. So hopefully these steps are going to be useful for you as well to improve the performance of your app. Kindly do subscribe my channel, right, and like and comments as well, and give your feedback into the comment section that what next topics we should cover into the React Native. Thank you very much.